Hello, my name is Paul Beyer. I'm the Director of Smart Growth at the New York State Department of State. I work closely with the Office of Planning, Development, and Community Infrastructure at the Department of State, which oversees the Governor's Downtown Revitalization Initiative. Today we were going to talk about application insights from a couple of the Downtown Revitalization Initiative winners, Oswego and Watkins Glen. In this year's State of the State Executive Budget, Governor Cuomo announced a fourth round of the Downtown Revitalization Initiative, once again making revitalization of New York's downtowns a priority. Applications are going to be open for communities seeking to participate in this fast-paced planning and implementation program designed to boost local economies by transforming 10 communities each year into vibrant neighborhoods where the next generation of New Yorkers will want to live, work, and raise a family. $100 million will be invested in 10 downtown neighborhoods this year across the state. Each of the state's 10 regional economic development councils will solicit applications and choose one downtown that is ripe for revitalization and has the potential to become a magnet for redevelopment. Business, job creation, greater economic and housing diversity, and opportunity. We're going to be joined today in this webinar to provide some insights into the application process, particularly the outreach and engagement portion of assembling your application by the mayor of the city of Oswego, Billy Barlow. Oswego was one of the first winners of the DRI in its first round. It's a successful DRI. It has won an award from the International Downtown Association for its plan, its strategic plan, that it put together once it won that award. Judy McKinney Cherry is the Executive Director of the Schuyler County Partnership for Economic Development. She co-chaired the local planning committee of the Downtown Revitalization Initiative in Watkins, Glen, and she has recently been appointed the co-chair of the Southern Tier Regional Economic Development Councils. These are two different communities in many ways. Watkins Glen is a village. It's a very small community, in fact, the smallest Downtown Revitalization Initiative winner. Oswego is a city, and Oswego would be considered a mid-sized city in relation to cities throughout upstate New York. They confronted many similar issues in putting their application together and doing community outreach to develop those applications, but they also had their own unique experiences. What we asked of communities when they put their applications together for round 4 is that they demonstrate strong and broad public support for their applications. That's why we're holding this webinar today, to provide guidance in that regard. Applications should show that the public has been invited to provide input and ideas on a proposed vision, the projects, and initiatives. Each community should describe the public outreach process and show how the public was involved in identifying the DRI vision and the proposed projects. The ultimate goal of the Downtown Revitalization Initiative is to create great downtowns, places that are vibrant, attractive, and livable, and that have a strong sense of place. At the end of the planning process, strategic investment plans must identify specific projects that align with and advance the community's vision for the identified downtown, and that can be implemented with the downtown's DRI award and other complementary public and private funds. With that as an introduction, we'd like to start with you, Mayor Barlow, for the first question. How did you generate input and buy-in through effective public engagement and outreach in putting your application together, and not just in preparing your submission, but also through prior planning initiatives, drawing on prior planning within your city and other planning programs? And then how did you convey that outreach effectively through your application?
Well, thanks, Paul, for having me. I'm excited to talk about our DRI application and the progress we've made since winning in 2016. When we were sitting down to first develop our application to submit to New York State, we wanted to talk about the progress we were already making as a community, and that's why we titled our plan, our application, Building on Momentum. So in Oswego, we already had a few projects getting off of the ground, and we were talking to some developers who were already showing interest in doing some development projects on sites that had been vacant for quite some time. At the same time, we had just started performing a LWRP process. We conducted a water process of a county-city partnership with a BOA, addressing our brownfield sites. So we had all of those documents and resources really on our desk when we sat down to discuss this DRI application, and that's where we started. And then, of course, we had some basic goals that we got from community feedback, for instance, talking about how to connect our waterfront to our core downtown. The city of Oswego is right on the shoreline of Lake Ontario, and it's divided in half by the Oswego River. We have a city-owned and operated Wrights Landing Marina, and we talked about how the recreational boaters, the people who have sailboats in our marina, they never seem to get to downtown Oswego and experience our core downtown because there isn't a walk that encourages them to travel to downtown. So we talked about how we could fill in some vacant sites, fix some dilapidated buildings along that walk that'll funnel them into our core downtown. At the same time, we wanted to embrace our riverfront, and that's why we looked at projects like development sites that border our river and border State Route 104 and West 1st Street. And then the public was adamant that we tie in the east side of downtown to the west side of downtown. City government has always been accused of giving more attention and resources to our core downtown west as opposed to the east side. So we needed some projects that would connect our downtown on either side of the river to each other. So that was really the public's general conversation that they wanted addressed, and then we just used the LWRP and the BOA to kind of connect the dots and put the pieces together into how we could fulfill that vision. And luckily we had those two documents already in the process, and that's really how we when we first sat down, that's how we looked at our plan, and then we began talking about who owned individual property and how we could make our downtown overall more pedestrian friendly so people would get out of their cars, go window shopping, and see and feel our downtown on their feet on the ground level as opposed to driving through.
Thank you, Mayor. Judy, you're in a community on the other side of the state, a much smaller community. How did you generate public input and also present that in your successful round 2 application?
So I think it's, thank you, Paul. I think that the first thing I would say is that it was a round 2 application. We had a round 1 application, and perhaps we'll have an opportunity to talk about that a little bit later. But in the round 2, I think that's where we really began to understand that there needed to be a deliberate effort made to be very inclusive with our different constituencies. Watkins Glen is a small village, about 1,800 people. And, you know, and as a result of that, you can have, very quickly, you can have small pockets of dissension or concern. What we found was that we needed very deliberately to reach out to very specific populations, and those included, you know, our disadvantaged workers, we were looking at sort of the multi-generational natives, right? Those that have been here for many, many years, as well as the new residents, to make sure that we had both voices at the table. We reached out to legacy businesses as well as those who were starting businesses up that, you know, were new to the community. We reached out to our civic groups, you know, the Rotary and the Lions Club. We reached out to nonprofits, as well as faith-based organizations. So we had the chamber engaged, of course, the Community Development Corporation, the IDA, and our Workforce Investment Board. So what we did for outreach, and again, this is for our second attempt at this, was we brought all of these representatives together around a table in a meeting, and we literally went through, let me back up just a moment and say that we used traditional methods to reach out to them. So we put the small ads in the local, in the local paper. We also used social media and really sort of used the all the contacts that were out there to make sure that we were putting our best effort to get all the voices at the table. Once we had them around the table, we actually reviewed the first submittal that we had made in round one. And what we asked them to do was to come back to us and respond to, is this accurate? Is this, are we putting forth the qualities of Watkins Glen, of this community that you hold most dear, right? What is it that we need to have? And where are those needed changes? And so we actually did sort of a deep dive on where we needed to make modifications from the first year's application, and we used this broad base of people and organizations to help us craft the new one. This was not led by an elected official, and it was not led by economic development. It was actually led by the Director of Planning for Schuyler County, Kristen Van Horn, who is also the chairman of the Community Development Corporation. And so, led this effort. And I think that in doing so, we were able to get buy-in very quickly as we went through the process, and that carried over even after the award was made.
Great. Thank you. Following up on this question, Judy, first, you both mentioned that you had engaged in prior planning activities, the local waterfront revitalization program, which is run out of the Department of State. How did you use those plans and others, and even other awards from the state through the consolidated funding application process to show that you were ready and ripe for redevelopment? And Judy, if you could touch on the partnership you developed with your neighboring community in that regard, that would be helpful. Right.
So thank you. So the first thing I would mention is that Watkins Glen, like many communities in New York, has had the blessing of having many, many plans. There were lots of plans that were done going all the way back to Watkins Tomorrow back in the early 80s. And so, because we had the benefit of all these different planning activities, we sort of took what were the common themes. As we were starting this process in our first year, we looked at all of those plans and we looked for what was commonly held through the different years as we moved forward. So we had those plans, and then we had the LWRP that, again, was completed, and so that was sort of the most recent plan. We made sure that the Watkins Glen Comprehensive Plan and the County Comprehensive Plan were all considered and all built upon when we were putting together the DRI. The other thing that we did was we really wanted to leverage the investments that had been made both by the state, by the different state organizations and agencies, as well as private sector investments. And so what we focused on was identifying all of those investments that had been made by the Parks Department, by HCR, by the DOT, and we knew that if we were successful in leveraging those investments, that we would have a strong application. So we knew that the DOT was about to do a major road improvement project. We put that in our application. We knew that State Parks was putting $6.5 million into the Watkins Glen State Park. We put that into the application. So we made a conscious effort to think very broadly about how do we leverage all of the investments that the state is already making in and around this community. In addition to that, we looked and we were very conscious and very deliberate in looking at CFA awards that we had sort of in hand from different state agencies, including the Department of State, And we had a CFA that we were successful in winning that was part of our LWRP. It's an LWRP-related CFA that actually tied together Montour Falls and Watkins Glen. And there is a canal, there is a waterway that connects the two of them, part of the Erie Canal Heritage Corridor. And we had in that grant application and that award the opportunity to make improvements both in Watkins Glen and in Montour Falls. And so that's a great example where the DRI money must be used within the confines of the DRI area, and yet there is a spillover benefit because we were able to leverage awards that have been made, but we hadn't actually started the projects yet. And so I think that communities that are considering a DRI really need to look at all of their assets and identify how to leverage those that they may have already have sort of within their organization, but perhaps they haven't actually exercised it yet or received the contract from the state. Does that answer your question?
Yes, absolutely. And since the Department of State also houses the Local Government Efficiency and Shared Services Program, it's good to hear that there was collaboration across the two communities. Mayor, you have both a Brownfield Opportunity Area Plan, a designated plan, one of only a few in the state, and a local waterfront revitalization plan. How did you use those to make your application more attractive?
Yeah, again, we just wanted to connect our downtown to the waterfront, and we had the identified activities in our LWRP already on the table. We had the BOA sites already designated, and we actually put out an RFP to one developer, Housing Visions, for the Flexo Wire site while we were doing the application for the DRI. So that was helpful, showed the state we were serious, and then we also identified property owners who owned property downtown that had vacant property or underdeveloped property, and we went and engaged them with letters of intent and so forth, that if we could win this $10 million, we could leverage it into more private investment, and that's why all told our final DRI plan leverages about $50 million in private investment thanks to the $10 million from New York State. So as Judy said, that leverage component, I believe, was very appealing to the state. And then also we identified kind of the fast track, the way forward, where once we won the money, how it would all tie in together. We already had a complete streets project on 104, State Route 104 in the planning phase. We advocated for that to receive funding from the $10 million. We had development that we wanted to get done on our West Linear Riverwalk, improvements that were desperately needed there. And then we had, as far as our private developers go, we laid out that CFA process where we committed to these private developers that we would see these projects through, and once we secured the $10 million, continue to go after the CFAs. In 2016, it was the DRI's first year, as you know, so we actually put these private developers in our DRI. At the same time, we were turning around and submitting CFAs for these same economic development projects through EST, just in case we didn't win the DRI. So we were making both cases at the same time, through the DRI and then through the CFA process as well. And we already had the information. It showed the seriousness of the developers and that they were committing to it. And it just, overall, everything fit into our bigger picture of trying to leverage private investment, trying to connect our waterfront to our downtown. And then last important component was being a SUNY community. We have SUNY Oswego right here in our backyard. A challenge the city of Oswego has always had is the lack of affordable quality housing units in the city of Oswego for both Oswego residents and SUNY students. So we really played on, again, another asset, SUNY Oswego, and said that prices for rental units in the city were too high, the quality was too low, and we desperately needed quality, affordable rental units in the city and in downtown. Millennial SUNY students, they like to be near where the action is. That correlates directly into economic activity. So a major component of our plan was to introduce residential units to our core downtown as well.
Thank you. You mentioned that you had significant buy-in and collaboration with the development community, the college, and others. Mayor, starting with you, were there any constituencies or stakeholders that you specifically identified that could have been left out of the process, the planning process, that you identified and engaged, maybe underrepresented populations or stakeholders?
Well, during the application phase, again, being the first round in 2016, it was a new idea to everybody. And we knew the DRI made it through the state budget, but it wasn't one of the big ticket items, I guess you could say, out of that state budget. So it wasn't receiving a lot of local press. And being the first round, we really didn't go out and get a huge team to write our application. It was literally me, and we were a new city administration at the time. So I had 3 members of my economic development team and the city attorney, and we kind of sat in a room for about a month and developed this plan and went out on our own to get these developers and bring them to the table and kind of connected the dots ourselves. And then once we formed that plan, we kind of made the rounds to local stakeholders, places like SUNY Oswego, Oswego Health, some of our major employers. I'd say we really didn't have time from when the state budget was passed in April to the time submissions were due to go out and talk to everybody. So, you know, I can think of one area, the boaters and the folks who use our marina. We really didn't have time to go engage them and see firsthand what they thought our plan should have. We did engage the Chamber of Commerce and the small businesses downtown to try to see, try to make sure that they were favorable to what we were submitting, but they weren't actually in the room when we were crafting the plan. And lastly, I'll say part of that was because we weren't so sure we were going to win. So we didn't want to get the community extremely excited, only to be let down. We didn't know there would be more rounds in the years ahead. So we really developed them in-house and just took, as Judy alluded to earlier, some of the documents we had on the shelf, a downtown 2020 plan, the LWRP, the BOA, and put the pieces together. Tried to reach out to the stakeholders we knew we needed to engage, but we really didn't get into the weeds of other communities outside or other groups outside of downtown.
Judy, you had a little bit of time and some expertise to draw on the round 1 winners. What were you able to do in terms of identifying a broad base of stakeholders and maybe some constituencies that may not be represented in the planning and decision-making process?
Right. So I think that anytime you're about to take on anything that's transformational, that always creates fear, right? That's a very normal human response. So I thought it was very important for us to reach out to organizations like the Arc of Schuyler, which has a workshop for workers that have disabilities. So that's an organization that typically would not necessarily be engaged, and yet we wanted to make sure they were engaged. Same with our, same with the Chamber, of course, would have been engaged regardless because they're located downtown. But we also, interestingly enough, we did in fact engage, and it just occurred to me, I should have brought this up, we actually engaged kids that were in high school and talked about what we were trying to accomplish. And so I think that there was a broader, we're a smaller community, right? So in some ways it's easier to reach everyone. In other ways it's easy to not reach someone because you just forget that they're there. So I think, again, you know, as a community, it's trying to make sure that you have turned every stone over to make sure that you have reached out to them. And in fact, you know, I see on the slide, engage with deliberate intent, right? That it's those that probably aren't at the table normally. And even doing so, you're still going to have individuals that are going to say they didn't know about it because it just happens. But I think we were very deliberate, and I think that it's the disadvantaged workers that really need to be at the table. We also had an eye towards, and I'll just share this, we also thought about the regional council and the governor's agenda items, and were very strategic in making sure that we were meeting both the regional council's goals around placemaking and workforce and sustainability and walkability. That was very important to us to make sure that we were sort of ensuring that we, even though we felt like we really probably didn't have all of the attributes to win, we felt very strongly that we needed to put our best foot forward, leverage all of our assets, which were unique, right? We have the lake, and we have Watkins Glen International, and we have the wineries, and so we really tried to put together an application that took everything we had as assets and then met the needs of the state and the regional council. And then we just sort of put all that together and had someone, again, just as the mayor said, we did all of this in-house. We didn't hire anything outside. This was all done with, you know, my team, the county planner, and the CDC. We were all sort of non-artists putting this together.
And Judy, you mentioned fear, fear of change, maybe even fear of failing in the application. To both of you, starting with Judy, did you get any pushback or any opposition when you announced that you were going to put an application in? Oh,
yes. So it wasn't pushback. It wasn't pushback from sort of the perspective, I don't want change. The pushback, interestingly enough, were the number of people who have what I will call sort of a shortage mentality, you know, so they approach everything from it won't happen, it can't happen. So we had a lot of this isn't going to work, you're wasting your time, you're wasting your effort, why are you doing this? You could be spending your time doing something that's more productive. I don't know why you're pulling all these groups together to have this conversation. And so it was more of that attitude of it'll never happen, don't waste your time, and less of the fear factor of transformation, because I think that, quite frankly, no one believed that we stood any chance at all of winning this, except for those of us that were on the team who had faith in our community.
Mayor, any pushback on your end?
Very similar. What Judy faced is, you know, there was more of a doubt rather than a fear, and they just didn't think that we were going to win, and didn't think we had enough going for the community to actually win the money. And then, oddly enough, once we received the grant, and still to this day, we face the rhetoric or challenge that these projects aren't going to happen. We have shovels in the ground and buildings going up, and sometimes we still hear it. So it's a pretty interesting phenomenon, but you know, by and large, the majority of Oswego residents are thrilled with winning the grant and the progress they've seen since. I'd like to circle back to the last question and just mention one additional thing that I think is important. It's important for municipalities, I believe, when they submit that application, to show that the city administration or village or the community's investing in downtown themselves as well. So when we put in our application, again, I had the benefit of being a new city administration, so we had a lot of things, you know, low-hanging fruit, if you will, that we wanted to get going on right away. So once spring arrived, we submitted the application and then got to work on some of our initiatives. I think the biggest one for Oswego was I proposed implementing free downtown Wi-Fi throughout the entire Oswego downtown, and I think that drew attention through the newspapers, the media, social media, and we spoke to that in our application as well, that we were investing heavily in our downtown, and we had private developers willing to invest, and if the state was willing to invest this money, it'd be a worthwhile cost. So that's just one, another component I think maybe municipalities applying want to talk about what they're doing themselves with their resources and how the state investment can compound that.
Thank you. There's a feeling in the downtown revitalization world that we should draw on our own unique and local sense of place and character and not try to be something that we're not. So on that note, can you think of any examples of where you just really drew on your own unique character, your own unique culture in conveying that through your application?
Well, for Oswego, it was certainly our waterfront, and you know, one of the main components was talking about how we needed to better capitalize on our waterfront, and we are trying to generate activities that circle around our riverfront. We're trying to enhance our marina and our parks that line our lakeshore, and that's why it was so important to not only connect the waterfront to our downtown, but also build on our waterfront and riverfront. That's what a lot of the projects that are partially funded through the DRI do. So that's what we really hit home on, is capitalizing on our natural assets, the water. In fact, when the governor was here, he talked about how important it was to capitalize on the asset in the waterfront. So I think that point really hit home, and I'm sure every municipality statewide has that specific natural asset or general asset that they make their own, and they should build on it. And I think that was what stood out and probably made our application stand out.
Yes, and you have water in abundance. You have the canal, the Oswego River, you're a port city, and you're right at the mouth of a great lake. So that maritime history really came through in your application. Judy.
So I think that probably our approach, and I mentioned earlier during the webinar that, you know, we really sort of talked about all the assets that we had and how we were leveraging them. But what I will say is that, just going to the next level, is that, again, we have physical and natural resource assets, such as, you know, we have the lake, Seneca Lake, we have the canal that is featured here between Watkins, Glen, and Montour Falls. We are also a very small village, so it's very walkable. So you're literally able to walk the entire DRI and the whole village. So from that perspective, it's actually very nice, and that's an asset that you're able to sort of be very deliberate in the DRI area. The other piece, though, that I think that we have as an asset that was, again, very deliberately approached, and that is we wanted to make sure that what we put together was forward-thinking, that it wasn't about sort of, you know, taking care of deferred maintenance, that we were looking to position the community, to position the downtown for the next 20 and 30 years. So I think that that's another piece is as a community, we wanted to make sure we had a younger voice, tomorrow's workforce, those that were sort of going to be around for the next 30 or 40 years. So there was a deliberate effort to look at our assets as those individuals that had moved to the community recently that were younger, and also those individuals who had been born and raised in the community but left to go to college and for jobs and had recently moved back. So we were looking pretty hard at bringing you know, into the conversation and then being able to communicate those assets, those boomerang, you know, those individuals that we call boomerangs that left and then came back, and they were in their early 30s, or they came back to start a family. And I think that was an asset that was unique that we really tried to play on.
Great. And demonstrating progress is just such an important part, as the mayor had touched on. Would both of you just give a quick update on implementation, the major projects that are moving, how that's being viewed in your community, starting with Oswego?
Sure. So again, we won in July of 2016 and then worked with a planning firm assigned to us by New York State named Stantec, and then a team from the Department of State, and then our local city team. We had 4 public engagement meetings over the course of about 8 months, and really, again, because we had to develop our initial application so quickly, after we submitted the application and after we won is when we made the concerted effort to go into the public and fine-tune our plan and application and reach out, and we had more time to reach out to more developers, more business owners, and to dive into some of our proposed projects in more detail. So our plan, I won't say it changed, but it certainly expanded over the 1 year that we were working with Stantec in the Department of State. And then finally, in August of 2017, the Lieutenant Governor came to town and announced the individual projects and the amount of funding they received individually, and then we were able to start to get to work on construction and making these projects happen. And I'm proud to say that entering the construction season of 2019, 11 of our 12 projects that received allocations are physically moving forward in some way, shape, or form. So last week we just broke ground on a pocket park, which is a park being constructed between 2 buildings where there'll be a stage and some entertainment for, again, the occupants of those residential units that we're introducing to downtown to come down, have an area to congregate, whether that's do their homework or grab a cup of coffee and catch up with friends or family there. That pocket park is right along our riverfront, again in between 2 buildings in our core downtown, and that's a project that we're very excited about. Broke ground on that last week. At the same time, we broke ground on another public improvement project along State Route 104. It's our Complete Streets project, $1.5 million as we work to make the crosswalks safe to cross, implement some green space throughout our downtown, aesthetically help the area. I believe that project will be transformative because we've always struggled to get people to cross State Route 104 and shop at businesses on the north side of 104 where we still have a lot of our core downtown. So trying to expand the momentum into that area of downtown is critical to our long-term health, and I believe that Complete Streets project will help in that. We also have, last week broke ground on the Littoral Project, which is a 5-story, $3.7 million development project on the corner of West 1st and State Route 104, the same intersection where our Complete Streets project is taking place. Again, it's a building right along the river in our core downtown. We're having a new restaurant with commercial space going to the bottom, 4 stories of residential quality units up top. And then we also have our Riverwalk project. That's a $7.8 million 4-story development, 35 apartments with commercial space in the bottom. That is right next to where the pocket park I described earlier is. So you can see how all of these projects are tied together in our core downtown, right along our waterfront. And then lastly is the Harborview Square project. That's a 5-story, $26 million development with 57 affordable apartments ranging in AMI. So that is a huge void in the Oswego rental market right now. So that'll be transformative. And that project is right next to our city-owned and operated marina, has a gorgeous view of Lake Ontario. That was currently a brownfield site and is being developed by Housing Visions, and it was a vacant brownfield site that was our secondary DPW garage. So it was largely a vacant lot that is really filling the space connecting our downtown to our waterfront. And then we have several other projects underway, the water park. And I wanted to talk about one last project, is not allocated to a specific development, but we created what we call the Downtown Improvement Fund, where we took $500,000 and made that available to the small existing businesses downtown that want to do an expansion or some facade work or improvement projects. And that is well underway with, I believe, 22 small businesses that receive small to medium-sized grants, anywhere from $5,000 for facade work to $60,000 to transform vacant upper story residential space and actually implement those residential units. So we're making a lot of progress. The residents of the city, they're finally noticing it. It's a congested downtown right now because of all of the construction work, but it's a small price to pay for progress, and we're happy with the entire process so far.
Indeed, Mayor, and I've seen the progress firsthand, and what I'd like to emphasize here to the round 4 applicants is the importance of synergies among projects. How do they play off of one another, reinforce one another, and even bolster additional projects through catalytic effects? It's a fuzzy concept, holism, synergistic projects, and sometimes it's hard to communicate to your community, but we saw that in Oswego, and we're seeing now how those projects are not just individual one-off projects, they're part of a bigger whole. You communicated that well, and so did you, Judy. Could you give us a quick implementation update? You're a year behind Oswego because you are a round 2 winner, but what progress are you showing, and what effect is that having on your community as they see this come?
Thanks, Paul. So yeah, so we're a year behind, but we're trying to catch up pretty fast. We're pretty excited. So currently, and I see that you have up on the slides, the Kloop Park has kicked off. The consultants have been hired to do the master planning for that, and so that is moving very nicely. We will have our RFP ready for construction by August, and so we will see construction probably in Kloop Park. And this is Kloop Park is you know, it's a major park. It's right on Seneca Lake, and the amenities that are there are very aged. And so it will be a new pavilion that will have you know, some way to have food and beverage on the 2nd story. And the 1st story will have the mechanics for an ice rink, like an ice ribbon, and new bathhouses, new places for children and older adults to enjoy the park. So that is in play right now. The park signage, the zoning, and really sort of putting in place, making Watkins Glen more pedestrian friendly, that's in play right now. The state is in the process of replacing all of the sidewalks, and part of the DRI was a lighting project. Those lights are scheduled to be in this summer, and they will be historically specific lights. So they are the same lights that are in the same street lights that are in Central Park. So that's pretty exciting. So there'll be new sidewalks, new lights, and there will be new macadam, so new asphalt on Franklin Street. This plays off of a TAP grant as well, and I did not mention that earlier, but we had a TAP grant for sort of slowing some traffic down and making it much safer for pedestrians and bicyclists. And so this incorporates sort of the entranceway. So there will be new signage coming into Watkins Glen, both from the north, from the east, and from the south, which is, again, very exciting, and all of that planning is happening as we speak. The other piece, the mixed income, the worker housing and child care center, that has been through the planning board. It's ready to go. We're just waiting for HCR to release you know, the winners of the financing for this year. And then the redeveloping of 109, 111 North Franklin Street, that's 24 apartments, again, of worker affordable housing apartments with an incubator kitchen and co-working space and retail on the street level. So very exciting. Again, everything has its eye towards the future, not necessarily just taking care of who's here today. And then the redevelopment of Captain Bill's buildings that he has. If anyone's been to Watkins Glen, looks like a ship. And that he is prepared to start construction this fall in October. So that's happening. And then, so everything is actually going forward, and we're trying to move it as fast as we can without being irresponsible. And the Downtown Revitalization Fund, much as what the mayor mentioned, we have hired an engineering firm to do all of the phase 1 and all of the pre-work. That is happening as we speak. The applications were reviewed. We kept our LPC, our local planning committee, we kept that in place even after they were finished with their initial work. And that group still maintains today the sort of overarching guidance for our DRI project. So I think that's very important that I say that as applications are being developed, we thought very clearly and very thoughtfully about who was going to be on a local planning committee for this, and we made sure that it was not individuals who had their own personal projects at stake, but rather that it had a breadth and was representative of what we wanted our community to be, and also to make sure that those that were on the LPC had the future in mind. So we kept the LPC together. That is the group that's making the decision on who is going to receive the facade money. So our fund is not nearly as large as Oswego's. Our fund is $315,000, but it will be the LPC that actually makes that decision, and I think that's important for any community to really identify who's going to be on there before they win, so that it stays very objective and very transparent.
Okay, well, before wrapping up, I want to first thank both of our presenters, Mayor Barlow from Oswego, Judy McKinney-Cherry from Watkins Glen, for some great and unique insight into the application process. Thank you to both of you. And I'd like to.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, and I'd like to just stress one point in closing, and that is, as you've learned today, there are 3 previous rounds of experience in the DRI for you to draw on in putting your applications together. There are plans out there on our website. There are people to draw on, local planning committee members, public officials, and I would encourage you to look at what these successful plans have included and how they've approached the DRI in putting your round 4 application together. Good luck to all round 4 applicants. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. I agree.